Picture this. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who spent months lecturing everyone about fiscal responsibility and making tough choices, sitting in a television studio, trying to maintain her composure while a devastating investigation reveals that her treasury has essentially been sitting on a £136 billion property tax bombshell that could obliterate homeowners across Britain, and she knew about it, and she said nothing, and now she's been caught on live television trying to explain why she thought hiding a tax scandal of absolutely epic proportions was somehow acceptable governance. The moment when the presenter confronted her with the actual documents, the internal Treasury assessments showing they knew exactly what this policy would do to ordinary families, and watching her face as she realized this wasn't going away, that the jig was well and truly up, is already being called one of the most explosive political moments in modern British broadcasting history. We are talking career-ending scandal territory here, resignation calls from her own benches, and a Chancellor who might not make it through the week. You absolutely need to subscribe to British Mirror right now and hammer that notification bell, because we are witnessing a political implosion in real time, and you will want to catch every excruciating moment as this scandal unfolds and potentially brings down not just Reeves, but possibly the entire economic credibility of Starmer's government. Let's start with what this scandal actually involves, because the numbers are so staggering they almost don't seem real. The property tax in question relates to proposed changes to council tax bands and property valuations that haven't been updated since 1991. Yes, you read that correctly. British property taxes are still based on valuations from over 30 years ago, when John Major was Prime Minister, when the internet was barely a thing, and when house prices were a fraction of what they are today. This outdated system means massive inequalities, where some people are paying far less than they should relative to their property value, while others are being clobbered disproportionately. Everyone agrees the system needs reform. The question is how you do it without causing absolute economic chaos. The Treasury's plan, which has now been leaked in absolutely devastating detail, involves revaluing all properties in England based on current market values and restructuring council tax bands accordingly. Sounds reasonable in theory, except the consequences are absolutely catastrophic for millions of homeowners. The internal Treasury documents, which were brandished on live television while Reeves squirmed, showed that this revaluation would result in massive tax increases for anyone whose property has increased in value significantly since 1991, which, given that house prices have increased by something like 400% on average over that period, is basically everyone. We are talking about average families seeing their annual council tax bills double or even triple overnight. Pensioners who bought their homes decades ago and have lived in them forever suddenly facing unaffordable tax bills because their property happens to be worth more on paper, even though they are cash poor and living on fixed incomes. The £136 billion figure represents the total additional revenue the Treasury would collect over a decade from this revaluation. That is not a rounding error. That is not a minor adjustment. That is a full-scale tax raid on homeownership disguised as technical reform. And according to the leaked documents, Rachel Reeves and her team knew exactly what the impact would be, ran the numbers on how many families would be devastated, and decided to proceed anyway, while publicly pretending this was just about making the system fairer. The cynicism is absolutely breathtaking. What made the live television moment so devastating was that Reeves clearly was not prepared for the level of detail the interviewer had obtained. She came expecting to do the usual politician routine, acknowledge that reforms are being considered, emphasize fairness, deflect specifics with talk of consultations and careful planning. Instead, she got confronted with her own department's internal projections showing exactly how many homeowners in different regions would see massive tax increases, how many pensioners would be pushed into financial distress, how many families would struggle to afford the new bills.
and she had no good answers. She tried the standard lines about making tough choices and ensuring everyone pays their fair share, but when pressed on why soaking middle-class homeowners for an extra £136 billion was fair, she completely floundered. The political optics are absolutely disastrous for Labour. Labour campaigned on not raising taxes on working people. They made solemn promises about protecting families from cost of living pressures. They positioned themselves as the party that understood ordinary people's struggles. And now their Chancellor is exposed, planning what amounts to one of the largest stealth tax increases in British history, specifically targeting homeowners, many of whom voted Labour believing they would be protected from exactly this kind of financial assault. The sense of betrayal is palpable, and the political backlash is already building to devastating levels. The calls for Reeves to resign started within hours of the interview airing. Opposition MPs are having an absolute field day, calling her dishonest, incompetent, and unfit for office. Several backbench Labour MPs, particularly representing constituencies where homeowners would be hardest hit, have publicly distanced themselves from the policy, and some have hinted they cannot support a Chancellor who would implement such a devastating tax increase. The political pressure is immense and growing by the hour. This is not the kind of scandal you can just ride out with a carefully worded apology and a promise to reconsider. This goes to fundamental questions of trust and competence. What makes this even more explosive is the deliberate secrecy around the policy development. The Treasury has been working on this revaluation plan for months, running detailed models and projections, but none of this has been shared with Parliament or the public. MPs were kept in the dark. Voters had no idea this was coming. The lack of democratic consultation or transparency is absolutely staggering. In a functioning democracy, you do not spring a £136 billion tax increase on people without any warning or debate. You certainly do not lie about it when directly asked. The fact that this only came to light through leaks rather than proper governmental disclosure is itself a massive scandal. The regional implications make this politically even more toxic. The areas that would be hardest hit by property revaluation are precisely the areas Labour needs to hold in the next election. Southern constituencies where house prices have risen dramatically, red wall seats where former industrial towns have seen property values increase as they have gentrified, suburban areas where middle-class families own decent-sized homes. These are not plutocrats in Mayfair mansions we are talking about. These are nurses, teachers, police officers, small business owners, retirees who bought modest homes decades ago that happen to be worth more now because of market forces entirely beyond their control. Hammering these voters with massive council tax increases is electoral suicide. The pensioner angle is particularly cruel and politically damaging. Millions of elderly people live in homes they bought years ago, have paid off their mortgages, and live on fixed pensions. Their homes may be worth substantial amounts on paper, but they have no intention of selling and have no ability to afford dramatically increased property taxes. Forcing pensioners to choose between paying crippling tax bills or selling homes they have lived in for decades is morally repugnant and politically catastrophic. The Treasury's defense of the policy, such as it is, rests on claims about fairness and modernization. They argue that the current system is inequitable because property values have diverged so much from 1991 valuations. They point out that some people in expensive properties are paying relatively little council tax, while others in more modest homes pay disproportionately more. These arguments have some technical merit, certainly, but fairness is not just about mathematical precision in tax calculations. Fairness also means not imposing sudden massive financial burdens on people who cannot afford them. Fairness means transparent democratic process rather than secret tax planning. Fairness means considering real-world impacts on actual families rather than just optimizing spreadsheets. The leaked documents also revealed that Treasury officials explicitly warned Reeves of the political risks of this policy. Internal memos show civil servants cautioning that the revaluation would be highly controversial and could trigger significant public backlash. They recommended extensive consultation and possibly phasing in changes over many years to minimize shock. Reeves apparently ignored these warnings and pushed ahead with plans for rapid implementation. This shows either terrible judgment or deliberate disregard for the consequences, neither of which inspires confidence in her ability to manage the economy. The timing of this scandal is particularly damaging because it comes as Labour's broader economic strategy is already facing serious questions. Growth projections have been disappointing.